Will, how much should founders pay themselves? And I think it's worth exploring this pre-funding, post-funding, like there are different stages, but this is a
Yep.
question founders get caught up in all the time, causes them stress. And I get it because it's all about your salary and your livelihood. How much should founders pay themselves?
Well, let's start with, do founders get paid at all? Because I don't think that's a lot of people's default condition. So let's make sure we're setting the stage right. At which point there's money to pay ourselves, how much should we pay ourselves?
Great.
Now, to be clear, there is no version in any early stage startup that any founder is getting paid anything close to what they were getting paid before.
Exactly.
And when I say that, because there's tons of people, tons of situations, when I say that, if you were making $150,000 in your last job and you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm going to raise a seed round or a pre-seed round, and I just need to make the same amount of money, the probability that that's going to happen anytime soon is insanely low. If you're making more than that, then the probability just goes down dramatically. Now, if you're 22 years old just coming out of college, you could probably get paid anything and it was more than you were going to make otherwise. So it's a different scenario. But let's take this in three stages, three buckets, Ed.
Okay.
Let's do hey, the two of us are just bootstrapping and we're trying to figure out how to pay ourselves. Let's do it in pre-seed and we just raised 500K. And let's do it in seed. We just raised, let's say $3 million.
Okay. Got it.
So Ed, first version, it's just the two of us. How much revenue would you picture us making before we're paying ourselves in any meaningful capacity? Let's build a scenario.
I would say a good calculation, because if you and I were bootstrapping together, I probably have a job, right? If I'm looking at extending our runway as much as possible. So I look at what is the minimum that I need to live on.
Yep.
And then I calculate it based upon how much the startup needs, how much profit is left on the table. And then if I get to that point in time, then maybe I'll have that conversation with you. Listen, I might quit my job or I'll go part-time and I think I can start paying myself. But you and I, we're talking about that based on those factors.
You bet. And also, I think when people think about pay, they think about like corporate compensation, whereby once a year you get a pay raise and that's it. At startups, we can modify our pay every month if we want.
Absolutely.
Right? And so what that looks like more likely is the two of us start a company, and let's say we've got $10,000 a month in MRR. Not a ton of money, but it's a little bit of scratch. We would sit down and say, look, let's each pull $1,000 out of it, right? Again, not a ton. We're by no means necessarily even quitting our jobs over it, but let's pull something out of it. Because we can't lose sight of the fact that the business has to exist for our benefit and not just for the benefit of the business existing.
For sure.
This has nothing to do with being greedy. It's just not losing sight of why we even did this. So that $1,000 may not be a lot, but it's more than zero.
Oh, yeah.
And it starts that process. It's also a reminder of why we do this.
Yes. And psychologically, oh my goodness, does it ever go a long way if you've been bootstrapping, toiling away for like the last 6 months?
Yep. Some time goes by and our MRR goes to 15,000. We may look at that and say, hey, let's both increase our take by $300, $500, not even a lot, just a little bit. But psychologically, that little bit increasing matters. And again, we always want to look back and say, even if the raise is minuscule, it's $100 a month, $200 a month, now we're paying our cell phone bill from it. It matters. It matters. It starts to kind of build on that. So when we're doing it together, let's do it in tiny, frequent increments, knowing that sometimes we might have to pull that back too. But that's how we pay ourselves in the formative stages if we're bootstrapping. Let's advance over to pre-seed. We've raised 500K. Initially, we'll think, well, I guess now we can get paid, right? You'll get 60,000, I'll get 60,000, we're good. The person that doesn't believe that is the investor. So let's talk about what their mentality is. Ed, you've been on the investment side of the table. You've written those checks. When you're giving a pre-seed company 500,000, there's two founders. What are you paying them?
It's a negotiation, always. Mm-hmm. It's a conversation. But I'll tell you, when I'm not paying them or I run in the other direction, when the founders come to me and they say, this is my market value. If I was the CEO of a tech company, I should be getting paid $150,000, $200,000. I will literally run in the other direction. Like that deal is dead before we even get to due diligence, right?
And I was that founder. Okay. I didn't know better. Okay. And this was after I'd started like my sixth company. So it wasn't like I was new to the game, so to speak, but I was new to raising money. And so prior to that, I'd always bootstrapped and self-funded my own stuff. But I had this opportunity with this great company in the mid-2000s to raise some money. And we put together a small seed round of like $1 million, which was actually a lot of money back then, but still not that big. And so in that $1 million round, we go to one of the investors, and I'll say who it was because they're a good investor. It was First Round Capital. They were in the deal, and we were negotiating with their team for how we were going to pay ourselves, et cetera. And so me and my co-founders were like, well, yeah, we each make $150,000, which frankly was less than any of us were making in the market.
Sure.
But seemed reasonable compared to $1 million. And the first round team was like, are you out of your mind? And the answer was yes, right? But we didn't know it. The answer is yes, but we didn't know it. We're like, well, I don't get it. Like that's a perfectly reasonable salary. That's kind of in the comp range of what we'd pay other people that we're bringing on. Like, why wouldn't you pay us that? And to First Round's credit, they were in the right. Here's what they said, and they were very cool about it. They were like, you're raising essentially a minuscule amount of money in the grand scheme of fundraising. This isn't the time to cash in. This is the part where you take a $50,000 salary and we save and leverage that money for the other people we bring on, which, by the way, if you're the recipient of that, sounds awful. Essentially what you're saying is everyone else is worth more than the people we're giving this money to. And it's a lot to digest. And I pushed back hard and they walked. They said, you know what? You don't get it. And we're out.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And I lost an investor over that. Now, fortunately, we had other investors that came in and got our round done, but I learned a painful lesson. That's not the way it works. You get paid next to nothing. You get paid as little as you possibly can to exist in that pre-seed round in order to get to the next round. It's not awesome. I'm not advocating it. I'm saying that tends to be what happens.
And that term, little as you can, that really is the foundation, how I'd make the calculation. And I learned this from an angel investor who sat me and my wife down, the best angel investor I've ever had, one of the best, and said, hey, what do you need to survive? And we really had a heart-to-heart conversation about it because he sat on my side of the table, like, understand there's a lot of empathy. Going into the future, we would make a calculation based on what does the founder need and what do we think is fair, because we didn't want the founder to go to bed at night, put their head on the pillow and say, I'm digging into my credit cards and now I'm going into toxic debt.
Right.
Well, at the same time, they shouldn't be going, oh, I'm going on lavish vacations. Like, I've had founders, I was part of startups, and immediately, like, you get some funding and they bought a yacht, right? You know, and we'll talk about the big round of funding later on. So it's the minimum to keep the founder engaged, not hating life, while at the same time they got to be hungry. And it's just a psychological aspect of founders and compensation.
Right. We're also talking about a minuscule amount of money at $500,000. There's just not a lot of money to go around.
That runway disappears.
Yeah, you kind of just don't get to cash in on that. Now, you could make an argument if you're like, hey, Ed and I are starting the business and we're not hiring anybody else. It's just us. And so we both need to make $100,000 a year. And that would carry us for a couple of years, which is usually the duration of funding. And maybe you could make that argument. Probably not. It would be rare that we're the only people we're hiring or the only business expenses. But generally speaking, in that pre-seed round, that $500K, give or take, you're not really taking much of a salary.
Okay, so that's most of the founders are going to be in that stage that we work with. So talk about the $3 million seed scenario.
Seed. You bet. Okay, so now again, it's you and I, and we've just raised $3 million. Now, here's how you look at it. Take whatever amount that you're raising and assuming that it's going to be gone in 2 years, and think about it in those terms. So now we have a $1.5 million per year budget. Now, that is healthier, right? We may look at that and say, hey, we could reasonably support ourselves. So we're at roughly $100,000 a month, right? If each of us needed to make, call it $100,000 or $120, that's $10,000 a month. Okay. Now that's only going to be good for 2 years, but that's somewhat reasonable. If we look at that same amount of money and say, well, we need to each make $250, never going to happen. Just look at a percentage of what's out there, right? There's not enough cash to get fully baked. Now, when we go to a later round, Series A, if we ever make it that far, we'll start to look at bigger boy salaries, so to speak, like, $150, $200. But even then, that caps out pretty quickly. There's no investor that's thinking to themselves, how do I pay my founder a ton of money in salary? None.
Well, we see this all the time. We know founders that are in Series B, C, getting ready to go public, and they're still not getting paid that $250,000 salary. So that's what you have to keep in mind is you've got the out on the other side. You've got equity. You are the founder. So you're really kicking the can down the road, playing the long game.
You bet. And there's just no investor out there that's excited about paying founders big salaries. And it'd be great if there were, right? And I'm sure there's some investor somewhere who's agreed to do it. But generally speaking, it kind of isn't the way it goes. It sucks. Just so we're saying it, right? We're not saying, hey, and you should be happy about it. You should be like I was, pissed about it. like run out the door about it, right? That's actually how you should feel.
Yeah.
But how you have to respond is totally different.